Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, this is going to be episode 22 of the Zero to Hero series, the series where I take a character from level 1 in Soul Character Found and push it all the way to 10 out of 10 Harbingers, just to see if it's a good build or not and to test its cycle starter capabilities. And this time around, we're going to be playing Ignite Warpath Paladin. So if you don't know, Ignite is going to receive a little bit of a nerf next patch alongside all the other dots on Sentinel. That is because of the removal of Volatile Reversal. Volatile Reversal had a few nodes in it that supercharged ailment DPS to the moon. So EHG is being nice enough to give us a few buffs to make up for this removal of Volatile Reversal, as it was kind of a cancerous skill to play with. So thankfully we're getting stuff to make up for that. And the first thing that we're getting is a node at the top of Paladin where we're getting 50% more damage with ignites. So I decided, why not? Let's just roll an ailment build to see what the damage is. And I think we'll be fine. So we're going to be playing Ignite Warpath today. There's a few reasons for that. The first reason is Ignite just has a lot of good stuff inside Warpath's tree. Like for instance, there's a bunch of Ignite penetration, there's a bunch of ignite duration, and of course the cherry on top, the ability to convert bleed into ignite chance. This is important to have it innately in the skill because we can actually convert bleed into ignite utilizing Malin's Hubris. The biggest problem with Malin's Hubris is it has no attack speed at base, so at most you can get like maybe a T7 attack speed roll on it, right? And you can get like 30% attack speed on it. That's not that very good for a melee attack speed build, right? Because the gloves are best in slot, especially for an ailment build, because access to something like wing guards. Wing guards can give us up to 70% attack speed, which is a lot. And this matters a lot. Attack speed matters a lot, especially for Warpath, because, you know, we want to apply as many ailments as possible per second. First things off. Second thing off, one of our best in-slot weapons for doing a build like this is a Bardiche. The reason why Bardiches are so good is because at base it has almost 200% bleed chance with melee hits, right? That is very good. And then of course it's a two-handed weapon, so it gets two-handed, affixes for ignite, for bleed, and then of course you can put melee attack speed on it and damage over time. There's also nodes inside Forge Guard that benefit us for running a two-handed weapon, where we end up getting double the amount of effect from this node that gives us a lot of ignite and of course bleed chance. So having that innate bleed conversion means that we don't have to run a Malins, we can run a wing pair of wing guards. Also, wing guards just gives us haste while we're clearing. If you don't know, Warpath reduces your movement speed while clearing, so having haste on hit like this in this source allows you to actually clear much faster. Cool, great. Well, that's pretty much it for our damage. We're just going to be utilizing Warrior's Fury so that we can actually, do damage with our Warpath. Unfortunately, because of the way that EHG has built the game, and EHG just hates Warpath in general, to get a good amount of DPS out of Warpath, we're going to have to run a Warpath's, like a Warrior's Fury setup. If you don't know, it will increase the channel mana of Warpath every second, but give us a stacking more damage in AoE boost. Now, this has a lot of different benefits. First things off, ramping damage feels really good on an ailment build. Turns out we have a very large amount of ignite duration, meaning that our ignites last a very long time on the target, which then of course our super juiced ones do, which then give us very large sustain for our character, thanks to access to things like Bleeding Heart that gives us like damage over time leech, which is wonderful. The second reason why Warrior's Fury is pretty good. Well, turns out we're playing a melee build, and melee builds have to get into melee range, and melee range is very annoying because you take a lot of damage. But thankfully, being Warpath means not only can we move around while channeling, right? And we can also increase that area with, of course, Warrior's Fury, which means we can actually keep DPSing the boss even though they're doing a bunch of scary things. Like they're trying to shove a bunch of boss damage down our throat, but we can use Warrior's Fury to always keep, damaging the boss even though they're doing maneuvers that might actually kill us. That's very good for DPS uptime because that's not something people talk about that much in Last Epoch. You can make a build do a very large amount of damage and, of course, pump that damage up very quickly. But if your character dies like a twig, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of damage. You're just going to die anyways, especially with the higher tier Harbingers, especially on day one. But thankfully, with the way that our character is set, this is actually one of the tankiest Zero to Hero characters I've played so far. Even though we're at 2400 life, even though we're, not that much HP as a Paladin, it doesn't matter because we have armor while channeling. We're at like 70% armor. We have Throne of Ambition for even more armor. We have endurance capped. We have resistance capped. We have all of these things that we normally wouldn't have on different builds. And we also, of course, can move while channeling. We can abuse healing from healing hands. All of this combined means that we can end up being a build that pumps out damage, of course, over time, but it's not that fast, but it's always happening. So for instance, it's kind of like playing a brand in Path of Exile where you always have damage uptime and it's good to go, right? So we end up with middling DPS with this setup. Of course, remember, it's going to be buffed by 50%. So we're going to go from, I think, like 200k ticks on the dummy to 350k ticks. Now remember, ailments tick twice per second, unlike other sources. So that's actually like 400k DPS, which is the bare minimum to start endgame, in my opinion. But of course, it's being buffed by 50%, and we don't know all the other changes are coming. Like, for instance, instant cast Sigils of Hope is significantly better than Abyssal Echoes that we have on our bar. It's going to probably end up being a lot of percent damage and a lot of ignite chance that we wouldn't have access to before. So that's cool. That's going to be another buff to the character. Also, so remember, day one gear, very garbage. We have access to stuff like the Ignite Melee Rings, which is a lot of extra ignite chance. We have access to Cataclysm, which is a lot of extra more ignite chance. Like, Gucci Paladin is real with this build. We're going to be able to like invest into it much more, and we can of course invest into the mana gain by getting Rive mana gained on helmet and getting like exalted negative channel costs. All of those things just make the build significantly better, and those are things that we can get after a week of play instead of just a few hours of play like this character has. But that's going to be it for the intro today. If you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is currently the best way of supporting me, and it's the best way to show me that you want more content like this on YouTube. You can also as well hop by the stream if you want to see me make more content like this live. Now, let's talk about the character, shall we? All right, number 22. We were having a very dry streak of characters. You guys don't get to see everything in between. You only get to see the finished products. You never get to see how many builds I failed in between builds. And let me tell you, I think it was probably 4 different Sentinels. I got to level as Hammer Throw like 4 different times, I think, in between this episode and the last one. I truly do try things, and I truly do try to keep some modicum of quality for this series. So, unappreciated, unsung heroes that are all the Sentinels that I deleted between this and last episode, right? So if you don't know how we're going to be leveling today, we're going to be leveling with Hammer Throw. This is going to be Ignite Bleed Hammer Throw, or simply just going to go with Ailment Hammer Throw all the way to like level 40 and then swap into Warpath. Unfortunately, the way that Warpath works and a lot of different skills in Last Epoch, you are not incentivized to play them until you have like plus 10 levels into them. Not many skills have the same kind of power spikes that, like, let's say hammers do, or like Chthonic Fissure does, where they just work right out of the box, which is very unfortunate. But it does mean that I'm not going to suggest leveling as Warpath unless you want to hate yourself and uninstall the game. So we're going to be leveling as Ignite Bleed Hammer Throw. Here's our hair specs Orion. Pretty easy. Hammer Throw pretty much cleans them up pretty quickly. Very nice DPS for being level 8. This is about where we get a lot of hammers. Now, of course, if you want a more detailed leveling guide for this, I actually just uploaded one the other day 4 hammer throw, which is essentially what we're going to be leveling as in the footage here. If you want to see a much more detailed version of what I am playing, if you really need that, if that is what you need, you really need me to give you step-by-step instructions, I'll be leaving a link down in the description if you want to see how to exactly level as hammer throw. Now, this is where we equip a two-handed axe. The reason why a two-handed axe is so strong for leveling as this kind of setup, and for, of course, the future setup when we swap into Ignite Warpath, is because a two-handed axe gives us access to not only the 75% bleed chance while wielding an axe at the beginning of Forge Guard, it also gives us access to the massive, and I mean massive, like I think 140% ignite and bleed chance at the middle of Forge Guard. Both of those combined lets us scale our ignites and bleeds up to the moon with our hammer throw, and then eventually that also lets us scale our warpath to the moon, because remember, warpath is going to convert all of those bleeds into ignites for us. Here's our Emperor remains here. He pretty much melts because this is where we get a lot of our ailment chance. Unfortunately, hammer leveling isn't that like spicy or crazy, so we're just gonna skip all the way to the end here, and we're just gonna kill the twins here. We have Pontifex Julia, which dies instantly. We have Hearten, and of course we have Zarek. As you can see, we have a bajillion damage at this point, and that is just because we have so much ailment chance, as you can see on the screen here. So here's our first normal monolith. We do finish the campaign and get all of our idle slots and passive points, and then we respec into Warpath. So we go with Warrior's Fury Warpath, which means we're consuming mana a lot faster, but we end up with a lot more damage in area, right? And of course, once we run out of mana, we refill it with Rive. Rive has a very high base attack speed, which means we can get a lot of mana based on the 10 mana we get whenever we use Rive, thanks to the base Sentinel passive, right? That just lets us just play the build and actually have a good time, because our mana sustain is based off our attack speed, and we're incentivized to get attack speed because we're an ailment build. So all of that combined leads to our, Warpath feeling pretty good. Cool. That's great, right? Now, of course, if you want to play without Warrior's Fury, trust me, this is not the build for you. If you want a build that like plays Warpath and turns their brain off, this is not the build for you. There are better builds for you. This is not it, because they're just simply just better setups. This build requires you to actually, put some button work in, but you get a benefit for that. You get a lot of damage, and you also get to be really tanky. Like, EHG has done a very good job at stomping out AFK friendly playstyles, at least at the lower budgets, right? Once you get into the higher budgets, right, you can start working on those, invest a little bit more into damage and stuff like that to make up for the fact. But like day one, oh yeah, you're going to want to go Warrior's Fury on this thing. Like, look at the DPS that we're doing on this A-bomb here. For a Warpath build, this is a phenomenal DPS. Here's our second monolith here. Here's when we get like Healing Hand set up. Here's when like we just feel a lot better for our mana overall. We get to like channel Warpath for a bit longer. That area just feels so good in general. We were using Javelin for the longest of time. That's because I felt like the extra mobility would help. But then I realized in endgame, I wasn't using it as much, so I swapped it out for Abyssal Echoes. Now, Abyssal Echoes ends up being a decent slot, but later on, when the patch comes, you're actually going to want to swap out Abyssal Echoes for Sigils of Hope, as the automatic casting of Sigils of Hope is probably going to be significantly better than whatever the fuck Abyssal Echoes is doing in this build, right? As you can see here, we're just mowing down enemies. Turns out the Warrior's Fury plus Ignite stuff is such a high power boost early on that you just feel kind of good early on. It does taper off a little bit into endgame, I will say, but early on, it feels great. Even without a bleeding heart, you have enough healing from Healing Hands, you have enough mana sustain from Rive. It just, overall, just feels like a good package. Now here's our Rae. This actually felt like a really comfortable Rae. Usually my Raes take forever, but it turns out with the way that, of course, this character is set up, the early power spike is enough to just put on those really big ignite ticks on Rye, right? And it just feels great. It just feels great early on. Like I'm really surprised at how good it feels early on. Here's our Lagan. Unfortunately, this is where the DPS tapers off just a little bit, and that's because I have to start caring a little bit more about survivability. That's one of the biggest problems with playing a melee build. If I was playing like a range build or like a rogue or something, 1000 HP at this point would be like quote unquote acceptable. But the problem is, as a sentinel, you're going to get hit a fuck ton if you're not moving a bunch, right? Thankfully, we are playing a Warpath build, so we can move while attacking. It's much better than like some other Sentinel melee builds I won't mention because, you can actually move while hitting. Sure, your DPS isn't like quote unquote phenomenal. You're not deleting the boss in seconds, but you get to have a comfy playstyle while doing so. And sometimes that's all people really want is a comfy playstyle. They don't want to play glass cannon. They just want to play something that like just works out of the box, isn't too hard to work with, and this build ends up being that. Here's our first 90 monolith. This is about where we get access to like a pair of wing guards, right? Wing guards just gives us a lot of attack speed. As you can see, that Rive attack speed is huge. This is also when we swap into Abyssal Echoes for extra single target. Now looking back, I'll be honest, Abyssal Echoes wasn't really doing much for the build, but of course, there isn't really that much to slot into this slot right now. Thankfully, EHG is fixing our problem, and by giving us access to the new Sigils of Hope, which automatically cast for us, and we don't have to worry about actually casting them, which is a huge buff to Warpath Andes everywhere, which is great. They dealt with that problem for us. As you can see here, one of the biggest problems that we have with this build is we don't have access to Leech right now, because I don't get a Bleeding Heart until very late into the character. So the way to combat this is we're only like, warpathing for like maybe 3 to 4 second chunks, while the healing from Healing Hands, damage over time healing, right, where it heals you over time, it will cover us when we're warpathing for the first few seconds, but then after that, we end up taking a lot of extra damage. Now, of course, we do have ways of dealing with this, as you'll see later, but, it is something to note if you don't get a Bleeding Heart. So use all your Runes of Ascendance on amulets first, get a Bleeding Heart, then swap into, swapping into using Runes of Ascendance on gloves, and then after that, you can probably use whatever else. Here's the Shamans, one of the 90 monolith bosses. As you can tell, I'm trying to get them together so that I can actually kill them all at once. It's actually one of the better things that Warpath and Warrior Sphere you can do, where we can collect the Shamans together in kind of a circle, and then of course kill them all together because our Warpath AoE is pretty good. Like I said before though, our bossing ends up being way comfier than I thought it would be, and that's because turns out after you've done so many Zero to Hero episodes like I have now, where you've leveled so many characters and played so many characters fresh, that skill expression becomes a factor in how you play characters. So Warpath is one of those skills that lets you manipulate that. Like Warpath allows you to manipulate your position and you're able to choose where you're at, which means you can bait out boss attacks, you can face tank things. Like it just gives you so many different options that for someone like me who mechanically plays the game a lot, it's just a treat playing with Warpath because it ends up just allowing you to quote unquote dick over the game because, oh no, you're gonna do that swing on me, guess what? I gotta dodge it because I'm using Warpath, and I'm gonna deal damage to you the whole time. Normally, that wouldn't be something you could do. Of course, Heorot melts as Heorot always melts. He always fucking melts, no matter what build you're playing as. Now here's our first Harbinger. What's really nice with this build is it's a bursty build. The idea, we get into the Harbinger, we dump our load of our mana on top of the Harbinger's face, and then we use Rive to build it back up. But what's cool about Rive is it attacks very fast. And since it attacks very fast, we use Healing Hands very fast. And Healing Hands heals a lot, right? This combination allows us to simply phase tank bosses when we're waiting for our mana. And of course, when we're using Warpath, we can dodge boss abilities much easier. So this combo allows us to pretty much tank the boss for the most part, and it means that we can focus on doing the important thing, i.e. do damage. So here's our first empowered monolith. One of the bigger issues that this build ended up having is, of course, with the healing thing that I was talking about, where, you only have the healing hands healing for a little bit. It meant that I had to try to find a way to bridge the gap between this setup and, of course, the setup with Bleeding Heart. Because once you get Bleeding Heart, all of your sustain problems go out the window, right? Whatever, who cares? The biggest problem is we don't have access to that. So how do we fix that? Well, we can actually run a weapon with health on melee hit. I actually end up dropping a Bardiche with like T6 melee hit flat, and that ends up actually carrying our sustain until we get access to a Bleeding Heart. It's crazy, right? It's actually the weapon that we end up using the whole time, because I don't end up with a better Bardiche, mind you. My Bardiche is fucking garbage at the end of this, right? So it's really funny to finally use health on melee hit for once, right? Now, I'm pretty sure this Harbinger, the Harbinger of Chaos, is only healing hands and that health on melee hit. Now, I have to deal with the waves, I have to deal with her void attacks, I have to do all this stuff without having any access to any leech whatsoever. And let me tell you, it was a ride. It was a ride. Just trying to keep maintaining our uptime on our healing hands buff, right? So that we don't die, while also trying to do damage. As you can see, when I actually get to damage the boss, I'm doing plenty of damage, but this is the lowest of the low, right? This is the worst of the worst the build will get in terms of tankability on bosses, because, we have so much damage that we're taking from, of course, the terrain. All of those cold waves and stuff, they hit us and take a chunk out of our life, right? As you can see, we take lots and lots of damage from the cold waves. But of course, the boss, we don't actually end up taking that much damage from them. And that's because, we're playing Warpath. We can dodge around them and stuff like that. So, it actually shows that later on, as you'll see, the female harbingers actually end up being a complete joke for this build later on, as you'll see, especially when we get access to a Bleeding Heart. Now here, of course, Dread does the time-honored, tradition of bugging out the Harbinger. I'm trying to figure out where she went, and there she is. She's like climbing up the stairs finally. Very awkward. What am I supposed to do as a melee build here, right? Like, she literally walks off screen. This is why I think EHG hates melee builds, because they just constantly introduce things like this /S. I'm joking, by the way. And my unending campaign of showing you the power creep between normal Harbingers and Oribus. Here's another Oribus, right? It only takes like 2 channels to kill him, which is, not that much damage, which is great. I'm just waiting for him to die. There you go. Here's the third Harbinger. It actually ends up being pretty easy. We're still in that healing effectiveness phase where we have to use, healing hands and stuff. Once we get out of this, we end up feeling a lot better. But like, as you can see, we actually, just kind of sit on the boss and just tank her stuff. And that's because we actually end up having a lot more armor than you normally would have at this point, because we did manage to get an armor while channeling blessing early on. And of course, when we're using Rive on the boss, healing hands will just keep us covered, right? As you can see here, just trying to dump our mana when possible, trying to not die to everything here. Just like, it's very hard to do as a melee build, of course, we do have to be right next to her face. So, we do have to actually interact with her, unlike other builds. So it is a little annoying, but we end up taking her down in the end. Having no Bleeding Heart against the damage over time boss really sucks though. Bleeding Hearts aren't actually that rare. I just got Omega screwed over in terms of luck. So hopefully you guys get better luck than me. We'll see though. I hope that they do stuff to fix this next patch so we don't need a Bleeding Heart. But right now we're just kind of forced to wait around and try to pray for a Bleeding Heart at this point, right? Now, of course, as I always do, I push up my corruption as quickly as possible now. That's not only for more stability, it's also for more Harbinger needles and for more glyphs of envy. So you are incentivized to push as much corruption as possible when you're doing these runs. So we're already at 200 corruption. As you can see, we did swap into health on melee hit, I believe. As you can see with my life going up immediately, that is health on melee hit work, putting in its work, right? Now we're already at 2100 HP. That's actually a lot for this point, considering my gear. I'm wearing like a pair of wing guards with no HP on it. So this is actually a lot of HP for where we're at with the character, actually, which is nice. So we do actually end up slamming this pair of fiery dragon shoes. We end up with movement speed on it, which normally wouldn't be that good at this point because we'd actually want HP, but movement speed actually ends up being better for us because we actually use it to move between packs. We're using Warpath, so it ends up improving our clear speed significantly. Now here's the anti-melee Harbinger. Well, he doesn't end up being that bad. Our DPS is not very high, mind you. Of course, remember, next patch it will be increased significantly, because not only can we run sigils, so we can have better uptime of our buffs, but also as well we get the node at the top of the tree, giving us 50% more ignite damage, stuff like that, right? It might end up just feeling a lot better, but right now, we're not even having that big of an issue with him, to be honest with you. Like, sure, the damage isn't as high, but the damage uptime is huge. Like, you can watch me, like, I'm killing him when I'm supposed to. Like, some builds have to cower in a corner when he does his flurry of boss AoE attacks, and I can kind of just face tank it a little bit. Of course, you know, I'm not going to face tank a whole fucking, like, boulder to the face that has been growing for a few seconds, but I can just put in my damage, zoop up back to max mana, then, you know, go and put down my damage again. That just ends up feeling pretty good. Turns out, I'm surprised that I actually end up liking this. I think this is the benefit of the Warrior's Fury version, where I just dump my mana and then, you know, of course, run around and stuff like that. But as you can see, we took multiple AoEs in a row, and we're just sitting through it. It's great. Now we're entering the boss rush mode. So here is the 5th Harbinger, Harbinger of War. Was actually easier than most melee builds dealing with her. Here's another shade of Oribus to push up our corruption even more. Here's the Harbinger of Pride, which, you know, is always a cakewalk on any build at this point because, you know, if you can deal with all the other Harbingers at 300 corruption, you can deal with the Harbinger of Pride. I don't know if you can tell, but this is at 300 corruption on a character that's like maybe 9 hours old at this point. Another Oribus because I'm a corruption junkie and I want more. The 7th Harbinger, this actually ends up being pretty easy because this is when we equip our Bleeding Heart. I think we actually equipped it a few monoliths back, but this is when we finally got a Bleeding Heart. And of course, we have the, I believe, the 8th Harbinger here. As you can see, even if we take damage, we have enough HP and leech, and we also have the, you know, the idol, the 40% more fire damage idol. So we're just cruising at this point. Like, just absolutely beautiful. Now here's some 300 corruption gameplay to show you what it looks like now with a Bleeding Heart. Hopefully you get way luckier than I did on your Bleeding Heart and you get it before your 6th or 7th Harbinger, right? You definitely want it really early on, right? Like, Bleeding Heart is really good and it ends up allowing you to just face sync the entire game, which is great. As you can tell, doesn't matter how much damage we take, we leech it back pretty easily with it because damage over time leech is insanely overpowered. And of course, we have like, I think like 70% armor at this point. Like, overall, just ends up feeling really good, even though, you know, we're playing a Warpath build. We still have enough damage thanks to Warrior's Fury. This is also when we get the minus channel cost helmet, which also as well just smooths gameplay out significantly. Here's the 9th Harbinger. He's pretty easy peasy, especially when I realize I can face tank the necrotic dot pool on the ground with leech. All right, time for the final Harbinger. So our DPS was middling, but because of the DPS uptime that we have with Warrior's Fury, as you can tell, it doesn't matter. Turns out just having good DPS uptime is all you really need in this game, because these bosses, they suck. They really do just kind of challenge you in terms of how quickly you can, keep the damage on them, right? As you can see there, like, not many builds can just sit in that AoE, dude. Like, if you have a build that can just sit in that AoE, you can end up doing significantly more damage to the Harbinger, right? As you can see here, Warpath's mobility helps out a lot. For clear speed, pretty good for a Warpath build. You do have to stop and regen your mana every so often, but that's a small price to pay for actually doing damage in endgame. Tankiness. I think this is the tankiest Zero to Hero episode I've done. Even with the 6k ward characters, doesn't really matter. We have so many layers of just defense while also being able to deal damage while moving. That specific part is the most important part, by the way. Being able to deal damage while moving, while also, of course, utilizing the insane damage over time leech on the Bleeding Heart. It's crazy to say that like this is the tankiest one, but trust me, once you actually play the character, you'll know what I'm talking about. Anything that isn't an immediate one-shot ends up being pretty good for the character. And see, like, we have a lot of ignite duration, right? And yeah, one thing to note, rush a Bleeding Heart as fast as possible. It is so ungodly important for this build. A Bleeding Heart is so fucking important. Then go for the Wing Guards when you have access to that, right? Alright, so here we are in game with the character. Let's go over the skills, shall we? So, for Warpath itself, mainly, we want to get the minus channel cost here. The reason why we actually like this minus channel cost, because it reduces the amount of time that it increases the amount of time that we have uptime for Warpath for the channeling, because the longer we can sustain the Warpath channel, the more damage we can do. So grabbing this minus channel cost is very good. And of course, as well, Warrior's Fury gives us a lot of more damage per second. We end up channeling for like maybe 5 to 6 to 7 seconds. So this ends up being almost quadruple damage at the end of it, right? And a lot of area. Very important. Then, of course, this actually ends up turning into ignite duration, which is great. Then we also get 20% ignite duration here. We get bleeds converted to ignite here. And then, of course, ignite penetration with Arsenal of Flame. Cool. Then, of course, as well, we get 40% more damage. It's doubled while we're in a two-handed weapon or when we're dual wielding, which we are running a two-handed weapon. So that's also 80% more damage. All that combined leads to Warpath feeling pretty good. Now, let's talk about Holy Aura. Holy Aura is very simple. Grab the attack and cast speed here, get the fire pen, get the percent damage here, then get Flame Burst. Flame Burst just helps our clear out. We are just running Flame Burst just to help our clear out. It's not too important, but it just makes our clear feel buttery smooth when we're in those really big, thick packs, right? Cool, right? Beautiful. Now, then as well, we have Rive. Rive's whole shtick is to just do as much attack speed as possible and as much mana as possible. That is Rive's whole shtick here. Sorry about that. I had to sneeze. Everything else, you can do whatever the fuck you want with the rest of this, but mainly just getting the attack speed and the mana here is great. You could technically get the pull, but it reduces your mana. You could get the coal, but like it reduces your armor you get from scrap metal. Just don't take this node. This node's a trap. It will consume all your ignites. You don't want that. Don't grab this node. And that's pretty much it for Rive. Then for Healing Hands, mainly I'm using as a movement skill. We're using it to sustain ourselves with Cleric's Hammer when we're using Rive, and we're speccing hard into the additional healing per second instead, so that we can heal ourselves while we're using Warpath. This is very important early on. Very, 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 very important early on, right? And then later on, it's not as important when you have Bleeding Heart, but it just helps us have more sustain so we can face tank bosses more. Now for Abyssal Echoes, I'm not even going to bother talking about Abyssal Echoes, because if you don't know, Sigils of Hope is getting reworked next patch, and this is where Sigils of Hope would be if we had the quote-unquote new version of Sigils of Hope. So I'm not going to bother because this is going to get replaced, so whatever. And that's pretty much it for skills. Let's talk about passives that are important. So the first thing's off, attack speed. Attack speed is insanely important. Oh, I have a level, Lamel. Sure, just grab some HP there. Okay, cool. Attack speed is important. You want attack speed wherever you can fucking fit it. Here, just grabbing Abyssal Echoes, eventually you could take these 10 points out and put it into damage or HP or whatever here. So When you get sigils, you can actually take out of all of this. Actually, very big buff in terms of the amount of passives we get. Forge Guard, bleed while wielding an axe, very good. And then bleed and ignite doubled while you use a two-handed weapon. This all gets converted into ignite, which is beautiful. Then Paladin here, melee ignite chance, melee bleed chance, which gets turned into ignite chance, and then eventually this node's going to be turned into the 50% more damage. So you're going to have to take the nodes out of here, which is fine because we'll be using Sigils of Hope instead, and then you're going to put it into Sword of Rye to get the 50% more damage with ignite. So that's cool. And everything else is going to go towards this node for HP, and then this node for even more HP. And that's pretty much it for Paladin. Now, let's talk about the gearing. So for mandatory items, I would say Bleeding Heart is something that you eventually want. As I proved in the footage, you can play without a Bleeding Heart for a long time, but you definitely want one. So throw all your Rune of Ascendances at Bleeding Heart. Then you throw all of your Runes of Ascendances at Gloves for Wing Guards. Then, of course, Fiery Dragon Shoes. Then the Ignite Rings. And then like Calamity. And then you're good to go after that. Now, for items that I would suggest you get early on, a health on melee hit axe is good, but then eventually when you get a Bleeding Heart, you want damage over time, attack speed, bleed chance, ignite chance on a Bardiche base. There are some refinements you can do later on where you can run like an Eye of Reen and a Scepter, but right now, early on, you don't care about any of that. Just get a Bardiche. Helmet here. Reduced channel cost is a must to have eventually. You definitely want to try to suss out a reduced channel cost helm because it helps a lot. And then eventually you want the Rive on mana hit eventually as the other prefix and HP on a better base. Chest here, HP, fire dot. Then of course as well, you can get either fire damage over time or you can get access to bleed chance while wielding an axe. Eventually here, you want double ignite rings. I don't know if I have one here. I think I do. Yeah, you want double sun wreaths, but with good stats, good rolls, and then with LP on them. You want double sun wreaths. Those are your best in slots, right? For your rings. Early on, you just run something like this with HP, LE dot, whatever, and then you swap into double sun wreaths when you have better sun wreaths. Belt here, LE dot. Eventually you can do fire dot or mana regen. Remember, you can regenerate mana while channeling. HP. Gloves here. Eventually you want tier 7 attack speed and then maybe some HP there as well. Boots here, HP here as well would be good, but other than that, movement speed's great. And then Relic here, HP, LE dot, frailty. Eventually, you want a Soulfire with multi-LP. Getting a 3LP one of these is pretty easy, so eventually you want that. And that's pretty much it for this. That's pretty much it for that. For idols, like Ailment Chance, Warpath Area, Ignite on hit, Warpath Area, or you can go the other route where you get Fire Pen and Ignite Chance. I believe there's like an idol, like a 3x1 like this, that has Fire Pen and Ignite Chance. And of course, Throne of Ambition is just 40% more damage and 40% more armor. So that's pretty much it for the character. That's pretty much it for the build. With all that being said, this has been Dread. Off to go do something else. Bye.